Hello, A-Push students. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening. I don't really know when you're watching this. This is Mr. Loyd's first attempt at some asynchronous instruction. Asynchronous is actually Latin for watch this video. Okay, so forgive me. Be gentle with me. Be kind because I'm trying this for the first time. Okay, I'm going to be doing this periodically throughout the course of the year. I don't know how often because this is kind of a new idea that I have. But I want to be working from this book that I got last year and has been really important to me. I think it's a really good book. It's helped me understand my history, American history, a lot better. And it comes to us from the historian Jill Lepore. Jill Lepore, I'm going to talk about her in a second, but it's called These Truths, a history of the United States. She actually wrote it when her son was taking A-Push. And she wanted to make an entire history, 1491 to present. And this book actually goes all the way up to 2016. In her opening, she puts this quote from Abraham Lincoln, which I am actually absolutely in love with. Abraham Lincoln, you will soon find, is my presidential bromance. I love Abraham Lincoln, but I love this quote: "We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country." And I think that in 2020, those words could not be even any truer. All right. I think that a lot of times we have enthralled ourselves with certain stories about our past and our history, and that has kind of clouded our judgment. So I think that if we're able to disenthrall ourselves through this history course and through our studies, then we will be able to save our country. So when I get excited about American history, when I get excited about A-Push, okay, I don't want you. It's not just because I'm a nerd. I am, but it's because I think that this is life or death. I think that this is absolutely crucial that we're playing here. All right. So a little bit about Jill Lepore. She is the David Woods Kemper 41st professor of American history at Harvard University. She has written a number of books. History of Riot. This is actually a recent article. I'll post this link here, which is kind of interesting because it kind of goes into what we see going around the nation. All right, because riot and civil disobedience, that is a very natural part of American history. But she's also written The Secret History of Wonder Woman, which is actually really interesting and involves bondage, weirdly enough. The guy that wrote Wonder Woman was a strange man. Book of the Ages. And that was actually a telling story about Benjamin Franklin's sister. Okay, so first off, some of you guys might read nonfiction. Nonfiction is probably my genre that I read the most, and there's a couple ways that you read it differently. And some things that I'm going to talk about during this. One, and I can't emphasize this enough, when reading nonfiction, always read the introduction. That's their intro paragraph. Okay, and we're actually going to talk about that because that's where the author lays out their argument, okay, their thesis, and they also provide the contextualization. Okay, so contextualization statements is something that you're going to hear me say a lot, and I'm going to help explain how that works through this book, through this first chapter. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the introduction of Jill Lepore's book, These Truths. All right, we're looking for important questions that they're asking. We're looking for arguments that they're making. Okay, but these are all things that are important when we're looking at nonfiction. Okay, so the question stated, and this is very important. All right, because this is getting into. I think that we should have a few driving questions as we examine American history together. All right. And Jill Lepore starts it by she takes a October 30th, 1787 edition of New York Packet. All right. That's a New York publication. And in this, okay, she kind of gives some normal things that were going on there. There was a schoolmaster that was announcing that he was offering reading, writing, and arithmetic lessons to merchants and accountants. A Scotsman was offering a reward for the return of a chestnut colored mare, 14 hands high. Okay, that's how they measured horses. They still might. A lofty carriage, trots, and canters are very handsome. But also with that, in this article, was to be sold. A likely young Negro wench, 20 years of age. She is healthy and had smallpox. She has a young child. Okay, so along with this normal everyday business that goes on in papers that we still have today, people advertising things, we also had for sale a human being with a child. Okay, and so this is kind of important to keep in mind as we go. Okay, also in that same paper where a slave was offered for sale, in the back appendix was a brand new document. Okay, published in 1787, and that was the Constitution of the United States of America. Okay, and we are now familiar with this image that I have on the right side of your screen. Okay, we the people, written very large so that everybody could see it. Okay, and that is the beginning of the preamble to the Constitution. All right, and I want to just take a second to look at this preamble because this is important. All right, because what is a preamble? Okay, pre obviously means becomes more. All right, amble. Okay, that's, I don't know. Google it. Okay, but it's a statement of purpose. Okay, so when we look at a preamble, this is saying this is what this Constitution is supposed to do. Okay, all right, so we can all sing it together. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Don't ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. You don't have to sing it, but it's fun to sing it. But this is what it's doing. All right, and this is saying what this is going to do. What it is not a statement of law. This is not saying what the law of the land is. And a few words that I just want to point out because they're really important words to me. In order to form a more perfect union. And I really like that as an English teacher because it's kind of a contradiction. Because how can you be more perfect? You can't. Perfect is an absolute. Okay. But in that simple phrase, what that was is our founding fathers were acknowledging that they were not perfect. And in this Constitution, it gives us that ability to thrive, to drive, to try to be a more perfect union, to continually improve. Okay, and I think that that's really important to consider as we move forward in American history. All right, continue. The question stated. All right, and we're actually going to start here. This is again. I should have said this earlier. I provided my quote there. Everything that I'm putting on this screen is coming from Jill Lepore's "These Truths," unless otherwise noted. But I want to start with Federalist Papers number 1. Okay, with my man Alexander Hamilton. Okay, there. Also pictured Lin-Manuel Miranda, my Hamilton friends in the house. We are going to be listening to Hamilton. Don't you worry. All right. And this is really interesting because in the Federalist Papers number 1, he's making the argument for why we should ratify the Constitution. And in that, he asks a question. And I think it's a really important question. And it's in the second bullet point down here, whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. So think about how government had existed prior to this moment in this fall in 1787. Okay, prior to this moment, okay, people had been ruled by accident and force. What made somebody a king? Okay, according to Thomas Paine, he says it was the principal ruffian of a gang. Okay, it was somebody that just by chance or by strength or by power was able to seize control of other individuals. Okay, instead here in our democracy, what we're looking to do is we're seeing if we can do this by reflection and by choice. All right, and that is the question of that autumn, and in a way, it has been the question ever since. Okay, we are still asking ourselves that question. Okay, are we capable of forming a government that can control? Okay, that can justly govern the people of this country? We're still asking that question every day, and we do that by looking at our history. And really, it's a question that goes all the way back to this guy on the right here, Plato. All right, and he asks, was there a way of arranging government, okay, by constitution that allowed for people to rule themselves justly and fairly as equals through exercising judgment and care? Is that possible? Okay, and some of you sitting at home might have an answer to that question in your head. Okay, but that is something that we really need to examine as we move throughout history. Are we doing it by fairly and justly, or is it judgment muddled by demagoguery, the reasons abandoned for fury? Okay, all right, and so this is the thing that our founding fathers set to answer, and it comes down to our country is built on 3 prime political ideas, and these ideas are laid out by Thomas Jefferson, the great political philosopher of the 1770s, and in the Declaration of Independence. And what he says is that he actually wrote, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. okay, which is actually different than what actually ended up in the final draft. And he said that there is political equality, natural rights, and sovereignty of the people. Okay, now if you're sitting at home, you might be picking up on the irony of this because Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder. Okay, he believed that people had political equality and natural rights and sovereignty. However, he held people in human bondage, and in general, not very great. Okay, we're going to talk about that more as we go. Okay, all right. Moving along. Okay. Benjamin Franklin, who was on the same committee as Thomas Jefferson to draft the Declaration of Independence, he thought that sacred and undeniable sounded too religious. Okay, so instead, he suggested that these truths were self-evident, and that's important. Okay, and something that I'm going to talk a lot about is that the American Revolution was very much influenced by Enlightenment ideas. Okay, the Enlightenment was a philosophical movement that was going on in Europe, probably starting in the late 1500s and going all the way up until the end of the French Revolution and the end of the 1700s. And a big part of that was understanding the world around us through scientific discovery. Okay, so instead of being sacred and undeniable, they're self-evident. Okay, that sounds like science, and that is really what our founding fathers were trying to do. They were doing a political experiment. They're setting the parameters, and they do it the same way that you do an experiment down in Mrs. McMaster's class. They posed a question, they designed an experiment, and we have been in the process of getting those results for the last 300 years, almost. Okay, so, and this is the question. Does American history prove these truths, or does it belly them? Does it prove them or disprove them? All right. And if we look at Abraham Lincoln, he didn't think that we were quite there. Obviously, look at this man, Martin Luther King. He talked about how at the Declaration of Independence was a check that was written to African Americans, and they were looking to cash that check. All right. And so that's something that we are continually striving to. Again, coming back to that idea of a more perfect union. All right. So why this book? So she asked, why is it that that she's written this book? Okay. Because if you look at most secondary sources, you look at most history books, they focus on one specific part of American history. Jill Lepore is telling this entire story, okay? This entire story, and I think that this is really important, okay? We as Americans, everybody that's sitting at home, okay, in this virtual classroom, we are the descendants of conquerors and the conquered. We're descendants from people that were held as slaves and from the people who held them. We are from the Union and we are from the Confederacy. We are descended from Protestant, Jews, Muslims, Catholics, from immigrants and people who fought to end immigration. All of these people, we are descended from them, okay? Some of us might be descended from slaves and from slaveholders, both. Those are both of our ancestors, okay? So we have to look at this idea that the United States is founded on a set of ideas, but Americans have become so divided that they no longer agree if they ever did. We have a shared set of ideas. And if we look around 2020, it looks like a very divisive landscape, okay? But if we look at this common history and we really examine it, okay, we examine it as historians, we can understand and we can come to accept that we have one common history. All right, and Jill Lepore says, I wrote this book because writing an American history from beginning to end and across the divide hasn't been attempted for a long time, and it's important. And I agree, it is very important. That's why I love this book so much. Okay, so one reason that it's important is that it's important to understand history as a form of inquiry. And what does that mean? Okay, when we say inquiry, like in that is query or question, okay, and what we're looking to do is history is not something that's fun. Okay, it's not something that you just relax on a Sunday. I do sometimes, okay, with a history book. However, it's something that we do to try to ask questions, okay? Like you did with that one history project, you're trying to better understand the world that we live in today by understanding the past, okay? Thucydides, okay, a Greek historian, said that he has written his work not as an essay which to win applause of the moment, but as the possession for all time. Okay, and Sir Walter Raleigh, who's pictured here to the right, okay, wrote, by the comparison and application of others men's forepast miseries with our own like errors and ill deservings. So by understanding the mistakes that people have made in the past, by understanding the path that humanity has gone down through history, we can better drive a path forward through hard work and questioning. Okay, so, and I'm going to get into this method, okay? This is a lot, and I'm going to post this. So if you want to go back and review some of this, you're more than welcome to do so. Okay, so I want to point out a couple of things that Jill Lepore mentions in her book that I'm also going to do in my class, okay? All right, one, okay, history is a story. It's a narrative, okay? So it has a beginning, has a middle, has an end. Okay, we have set our beginning as the indigenous populations that first populated the Western Hemisphere because that's important because that drives where we are today. We're going to be covering the middle for most of this class, and we're going to end it. We're going to end it right at 2000 and probably going to take it to 2020. We really already have taken it to 2020, so it's our job to fill in those gaps. I'm also going to tell you, like Jill Lepore, I'm going to skip a lot. Okay, there is so many things in American history that I will never mention to you. And years from now, you might be sitting in a history class. You're going to be thinking, well, why did Mr. Loyd never teach me that? It's because there's too much, guys. Okay, we have to pick and choose sometimes. All right, but I'm going to try to clip and shorten the things. Okay, and I love this phrase, just like a baby's fingernails. Okay, just like I'm a florist that's kind of shaping a bouquet. All right, and I'm going to do my best to do that fairly. All right, and in deciding to leave stuff out, okay, we're really trying to do. I really want this, and I like this line, doubling as an old-fashioned civics book. I want you guys to understand, have a better understanding of what it means to be an American at the end of this, okay? By understanding your history, all right? And as she says on the right panel here, history is a method, and I follow the same method, and that basically is letting the dead speak for themselves, okay? Whenever possible, I'm going to try to use primary documents, and I'm going to let you be the historian interpreting that. And I love this phrase again, like flowers for their beauty or like insects for their hideousness, okay? We're preserving them, we're pressing them, all right? And we're going to try to walk this path that she talks about in this last paragraph between reverence, okay, and worship, okay? And this is a popular idea of American exceptionalism and America's great and patriotism, which, you know, there's arguments for that, and irreverence and contempt. And we're going to try to walk that middle path between reverence and irreverence, between despising it and loving it, all right? Because really the truth lies somewhere in between those two, all right? That's where we're going to walk, all right? And I love this because she goes back to Lincoln, okay? We cannot hallow this ground any more than it already has been. The ground that we are going to tread of history is already holy because the people that have lost their lives on every side of every battle has made it holy for us. Okay, all right, and that's largely what I'm looking for as we are going forward into this class, as looking at history through a kind of inquiry. All right, and I'm going to close with this. Okay, and this is the very last slide, I promise. But I want to look at this because this is a great example of what we call a contextualization statement. Okay, so Jill Lepore wrote this in her introduction, and this is what she was doing to kind of set the stage for all of that history. Okay, so bear with me as I read everything that we have on here. And as I'm reading this, because in your homework assignment that you have for John Green, you are going to have to write a contextualization statement surrounding the time that John Green is looking at. So I want you to think about, how do these two paragraphs set the table for all of American history? And that's the same thing you're going to do in your own contextualization statements. In 1787, then, when Alexander Hamilton asked whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for the political constituents on accident and force. That was the kind of question a scientist asked before beginning an experiment. Time alone would tell, but time has passed. The beginning has come to an end. What, then, is the verdict of history? This book attempts to answer that question by telling the story of American history beginning in 1492 with Columbus's voyage, which tied together continents, the ending in a world not really tied together, but tangled, knotted, and bound. It chronicles the settlement of American colonies, the nation found, and its expansion through migration, immigration, war, and invention. Its descent into civil war, its entrance into wars in Europe, its rise as a world power, and its role after the Second World War in the establishment of the modern liberal world order. The rule of law, individual rights, democratic government, open borders, and free markets. It recounts the nation's confrontation with communism abroad and discrimination at home. It fractures in its divisions and the wars it has waged since 2001, when 2 airplanes crashed into 2 towers of the World Trade Center 8 blocks from the site of the long-gone shop where the printers of the New York Packet had once offered for sale a young mother and her 6-month-old baby, and the Columbian Almanac bound with the Constitution or without. So I want you to look at those 2 paragraphs and look at how that sets the entire vision for talking about American history. Your contextualization statements are going to do just this. Okay, so when you're looking at those John Queen quotes, you're not contextualizing all of American history. You're just trying to put that little slice of history into a bigger context, and you're going to use your notes to do that. All right. Yeah, this is asynchronous instruction with Mr. Loyd. I hope you guys had fun. All right. That's it. All right. I like you guys.